And I just want to get started and thank you all for joining us. My name is Kristen Young, and I serve as the interim president of LeaderShape. And on behalf of our organization, again, just welcome to this time together today. As we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about LeaderShape, set up this platform for us that we'll be using, and then jump right into the program. So LeaderShape, for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to transform the world by increasing the number of people who lead with integrity and have a healthy disregard for the impossible. We work predominantly with colleges and universities around the country and internationally to provide learning experiences for students and staff. As you're on the chat, if any of you have participated in a LeaderShape program before, I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to if you could write in the chat when you might have participated in a LeaderShape program and when that was. If you want to share the year, that would be fantastic. It's great to see our community. And if LeaderShape is new for you, if you've not participated in any LeaderShape programs before, welcome. We're just really glad that you are here. A couple of things about our platform today that we're using with Powered by Action and Big Marker. This is a webinar platform that we have been using for a number of years to do our online training with our facilitators, but I want to get you familiar with some of the features that are here and available. You will see we're already using the chat feature there, so this is an opportunity, and we'll chat a lot through this webinar. One of the things that a lot of programs are very interactive. So we'll be using a lot of the chat feature where you can talk to us and to each other, to share questions, to share stories, to share pictures, thumbs up, whatever that is for you. In there, you'll also see there's a private chat feature, which you can also use. There's a little bit of feedback, I think. I'll kind of work on some of that while we're here. The other thing that you'll see, we'll put out polls throughout the course of our time together. You'll be able to answer those in real time. And then there is a handout section. We'll have some handouts for you as our time goes on. So you'll be able to get those there. There's also a Q&A section. If you have a question as we're going through our presentation and our program today, feel free to write it there in the Q&A section, and then I and our two other presenters will be able to see that question and answer it as we go through the course of our time together. The other logistics about using our platform, if by chance you have dialed in on a phone, on a cell phone or your home phone, if you could make sure that you have muted your line. Sometimes the system here doesn't catch that and doesn't mute your line, and so we may be able to hear you, typing or talking to the loved ones that might be with you in your home if you're at home. So if you could make sure that you do that, that would be great. The other logistics about our time together is that we are recording this. So if at some point you need to hop off for a little while, we'll be posting this recording back in the LeaderShape app and also on our social media platform so that you can pick up and watch wherever you might have left off. The other thing I want to let you know is thank you for signing up for the LeaderShape app and logging onto our website. You might have received a lot of notifications since you signed up for this webinar. And I am sorry, as I'm new to learning a little bit about our platform, there was a programming piece that had been checked that made it that everybody got a lot of emails. Our intention is not to bombard you with those emails, and so I've gone in and fixed that. So you should not be receiving as many notifications as you had previously. So thank you for bearing with us as we figure that out. The other thing and the final thing before I jump into some of our content is, I just want to ask for your patience today as our LeaderShape staff is all working from home, and so our webinar is from home. And sometimes when you're working from home, your internet is a little bit wonky. And so please hang with us if we do experience any technical difficulties. We do have some support people here from Powered by Action who's hosting our webinar, and they'll be able to help us. But we just ask for your patience as we navigate that as well. So a little bit, that's the logistics. That's the logistics of where we are and what we're doing today. And here are the objectives. So we're going to move very quickly over this hour to cover these 3 objectives. And, as we're doing this, we believe that no matter what you do in your daily work, what your title is in your organization, what your role is in your family, we all have the ability to be leaders. We are all leaders. And during this time of a pandemic, in a time of chaos and change, in a time where chaos and change is also happening simultaneously to us feeling calm and peace, our lives we're looking to leaders, right? Our family is looking to leaders, our communities are looking to leaders, and people are looking to each of you. And so what we want to do is share with you a little bit today about resilience and how, as a leader within your family, within your organization, within your community, you can practice these skills of resiliency, and that you hopefully use this time, this hour that we have together, as an opportunity to pour into yourself. An opportunity to have these resources available so that when you turn off your computer at the end of this hour, and whatever awaits you behind your closed office door or guest room door or kitchen table, wherever you're at, that you have walked away with something that you can put in your toolbox as a skill you can rely upon when your resiliency is tested, whether that's today or tomorrow or next week. And that really is our goal and our intention in our time together. And so with that, I want to bring on my colleagues, Abby Prince and Tanya Williams, who will be guiding us through this curriculum today. So they're gonna join us via video right now.
Awesome.
Hey, Abby.
Thank you for that introduction, Kristen. I appreciate it. Thank you. And is joining us as well. Thanks so much for connected to you. So I really appreciate all these familiar names showing up in the chat here as you're introducing yourself. I also love seeing these to our community today. I'm the director of mortality and management, talking about this topic at LeaderShape. And resilience is a topic that we've spent a great deal of time on here at LeaderShape, primarily with a full day workshop that we facilitate with partners and organizations. And in working on this curriculum, we pulled from a lot of resources just throughout our own research and reading that we've done. So know that as we walk, we'll be referencing some sources, including Dr. Emmett Zood, who's a neuro at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Soda, as well as Sophie's garbled audio. And so I'm going to try to turn my camera off and see if that helps, so you can still hear me better. Hopefully that will help. Hear me there. Sorry about that, friends. Can you hear me a little bit better now? Did that help a little bit with the garbled audio? Okay, good. Thank you for that. Okay. So some of the resources that we're referring to, there's a lot of reading and research that we've done, certainly around Zolli and Healy's book, Resilience and Why Things Bounce Back. Dr. Emmett Zood, who's a neuroscientist at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. We've also made reference to Sheryl Sandberg's book, Option B, Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, and then the International Consortium for Organizational Resilience around the Resilient Communities Framework, so that you know that. We believe that everyone was born with the capacity for resilience. And most people practice pieces of the components pretty regularly. And because of that, because we're only practicing some of those pieces, we never quite feel the benefits of resilience, or we don't recognize when we are living in a resilient flow. And so why this content? Why this content and talking about resilience, and why talking about it now? So we're living in interesting times and perhaps difficult times, as Kristen mentioned earlier, as we're adjusting to working from home and learning from home and being with our families all the time at home, and being distant socially from friends and loved ones, and this just responding to canceled plans as well. It can be taxing, and we want to provide people with tools they need to be resilient. So let's get started by talking about what resilience is. And for that, Tanya is going to tell us more.
Thanks, Abby. And for folks who hopefully you saw me on the screen with Kristen and Abby, I want to stay off screen just in case we run into some more audio issues. My role at LeaderShape is the curriculum specialist. And so I get to work with Kristen and Abby on curriculum and building curriculum, and have had a great time getting to work on this resilience curriculum for today. So there are lots of definitions of resilience, and the one that we choose to use at LeaderShape is from the book Resilience, Why Things Bounce Back by Zoli and Healy. And that definition says, resilience is the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. You'll notice that this definition helps us have a more holistic understanding of resilience, in that, yes, individuals can be resilient, but also systems and enterprises can be resilient as well. Therefore, we can begin to think about resilience when it comes to organizations, communities, and families. We can begin to ask ourselves the question, how resilient are the people, organizations, and communities in my life? And how might I be a leader to help build more resilience? Furthermore, when we define and dig into our understanding of resilience, we can look and highlight these markers of resilience. Resilience can really focus on our abilities to withstand adversity, our abilities or our community's abilities to bounce back from adversity, and our abilities to preempt and prevent adversity. And I think that that's one that we often don't think a lot about, that resilience is both about withstanding the crises or the things that come at us, but they're also being thoughtful about what we do now to prevent them in the future. When we talk about resilience, we know that we're talking about more than self-care that gets spoken about so often in society. Not that there's anything wrong with self-care. We just want to uplift that resilience is more than caring for your body or getting a manicure or a massage. Those things might help with resilience, but they are not resilience themselves. Abby will share more about this as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tina. Sometime, and we'll talk more about that concept of self-care here in a couple slides too. And I think that framing up is really helpful as we turn to some helpful metaphors just to help us understand this concept of resilience a little bit better. And first, I just want to turn us to nature for an example. I know for me, since I've been working from home, it's been nice to spend a little bit more time outside than I typically would. And so having these examples from nature to help us show what resilience is really nice. So this willow tree, just like this willow tree, resilient leaders are able to bend and flow without snapping in the midst of a volatile storm, which sometimes the world around us can feel like that right now. And so for us as resilient leaders, the strong trunk and these deep roots of a willow tree are our core values and our own practices of resilience. Those flexible branches are the ways in which we will bend but not break during stressful times. And so, and then thinking about a toy that maybe some of you had as a child, I definitely had this and really enjoyed punching the daylights out of these punch bag toys that we had as kids. They would topple over as you punched them square in the nose, but they would just continue to right themselves because they have this centering weight at the bottom of them. And when thinking about these examples, we have to think about the makeup of them. Both the willow tree and then this punch bag, they're grounded. Their very makeup or properties allow them to return to an upright position or return to their natural shape. And so today's work will help you ground into principles that help with developing resilience. And before we get a little more clarity about how self-care and grit fit into this model, I want to ask you to use the group chat where you introduced yourself to respond to this question. And so that question is, what might be a metaphor for resilience that resonates with you? And if you could just respond in the chat with your responses to that. We've offered these examples of the willow tree and then that punch bag toy. What's a metaphor for resilience that resonates with you?
While we wait for people to chat a little bit, I love that example and of a willow tree, and it makes me think of a willow that existed in my that exists in my parents' yard. And having lived in Houston, Texas, as a child, we had our fair share of hurricanes. And one of the things I always remembered was that the willow would be weeping or really laying over after a hurricane, but it would upright itself a day or two later. And so I'll always use that willow as an understanding of resilience for me.
Yeah, that's a great example. I agree, Tanya. There's a tree in my parents' front yard that whenever we get snowfall, there's one branch of it that always hangs real low over the driveway. And then as soon as the snow melts, that big branch goes right back up to where it was. And I think that that's such a good model of resilience as well.
I love these examples in the chat coming through. Rubber band, sunflowers turning towards the sun. Children, most definitely.
Yeah.
Most our greatest teachers about resilience.
For sure. Mountains.
Great examples.
Yeah. These are really great examples. Trees during the hurricanes. Yeah. Bamboo. That's a good example. It does rejuvenate really quickly, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Our bones, I see that reference there too. As someone who's broken a lot of bones, I agree with you, Kenneth. I know that our bones will heal back stronger in those places where they've been broken too.
I have never thought about water, Colette, being a resilient property, but I'm like, it is. It remembers exactly. It forms any shape, but then it can go exactly back.
Yeah. Jackie, I see your example here of evergreen trees. That's a really wonderful example too. They grow so quickly, right? That's great. Well, thank you for those examples. I think that's great. Forrest Gump is a great example of resilience. That's exactly right. These are really wonderful examples. So thank you all for sharing those. I really appreciate that. And so now that we've talked about resilience, about what resilience is and a few models of it, we want to turn to a few components of resilience as we consider more about self-care and grit. And so if you know me, you might know that I like to think in terms of Venn diagrams. It's just how my brain processes information. And so I like this Venn diagram that shows that self-care and grit, they overlap with resilience. They're components of resilience, but they're not equal to resilience. They're different pieces that help contribute to our resilience, certainly as we turn to what Tanya had shared with us earlier and thinking about it's more than just massages and pedicures, perhaps. And I really like this little cartoony example that resilience is more than just imagining John Wayne getting a pedicure, right? It's more than just someone who's really tough that knows how to take care of themselves. And so we'll talk a little bit more about these concepts of self-care and grit. So self-care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health. Self-care that's often defined by a self-care industry. Some people might see that as shallow or empty self-care, something that often wants us to spend money on a product or a service. And I saw a question in the Q&A earlier about how does our privilege, perhaps our identity, show up as we think about having resilience. And I think this is definitely one of those ways. So as we have the resources and the access to self-care and the different ways that we practice it, I think that's definitely something to consider as we think about what our privilege, how our privilege shows up in access to these elements or these components of resilience. Self-care might help us feel better in the moment, but it isn't lasting as we think about joining up with a friend to get a pedicure or getting a cup of coffee so that we can remove ourselves from those moments of distractions and pressures, perhaps leading to our own stress. It's important that we're conscientious about scheduling that regular self-care and whatever that looks like for us. It can be key to an improved mood, definitely, and reduce anxiety if it's consistent, if we're consistent with what that self-care looks like for us. It needs to be something that you actively plan rather than something that just happens. It's an active choice that we make. Developing resilience has a more lasting effect and impact on our life. And so it helps you know when you need self-care, when you can tap into those reserves and say, I just need to remove myself for a little bit and take care of myself a little bit. Grit, on the other hand, is a personality trait that involves perseverance and passion. It's the ability to persist in something that you feel passionate about and to persevere when you face obstacles. Research we know indicates that the ability to be gritty, to stick with something when things are important to you, is an essential component of success, independent of and beyond what talent and intelligence contribute. Grit is about being able to self-regulate and to postpone a need for positive reinforcement so that you can continue to push through on a task. We know that without grit, talent may be nothing more than unmet potential. It is only with effort that talent becomes a skill that leads to success. And so grit and resilience help us move through our life experiences and through our processes of developing each of those components might look a little bit different. So you can see that self-care and grit, they're definitely connected to resilience, but they're not equal to resilience. Furthermore, someone's activity of grit might be someone else's self-care. As you think about perhaps someone participating in one of those 5K obstacle course, rolling through the mud kind of activities, that might look like grit for someone in participating in that event. But perhaps it is self-care for someone to be able to dedicate that time to their physical well-being or their mental well-being to train for an activity like that. It's important for us to understand that resilience isn't a single skill. It's the combination of a lot of skills that are put together. And all of those skills are learnable to help us focus on the positive and navigate even our daily lives just a little bit better. And so Tanya's going to tell us more about what resilience looks like.
Thanks, Abby. When we think about resilience, that's a word that is just abundant in our society right now. Partially because resilience has become big business, and Abby kind of talked about that before around self-care. We talk about them interchangeably because the self-care business industry has become big business. But we really want to spend some time thinking about how resilience is different. And so when you look at YouTube and search for resilience, you might get 803 different videos on resilience. Searching TED Talk videos, you'll probably surface about 200-ish short 20-minute lectures on the topic. And searching Amazon books about resilience, you'll be reading for years as it boasts over 8,000 available books on the topic. With being such a catchword and concept, we have to wonder why we still struggle with the concept of resilience, or why it is not practiced more widely in our lives. And maybe it's because we don't quite understand what it is. The truth is, everyone was born with the capacity for resilience. And most of us practice pieces of the components of resilience, but we fail to practice the components regularly. And so we never quite feel the benefit of resilience or don't recognize when we're living in a resilient flow. LeaderShape has a model that you'll see on the screen now that helps us recognize from our perspective all the pieces of resilience. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking us through this so you can see how we understand it at LeaderShape. So we all have regular disturbances or stress that manifest in our lives. We increasingly live in a society, and increasingly and even more increasingly now, given the pandemic and really existing on Zoom or in very electronic states. We move at a pace that is built for machines and devices that we use rather than the human bodies that we are. Think about the number of emails that might be waiting for you when you return to your inbox after this webinar. That regular state of stress and life disturbances are represented by the raindrops. So the distraction, the stress, the disturbances. And every once in a while, we have a large life disturbance like a job change, death in our family, or a surprising health issue that tests our resilience in a new way. We are in the midst of one of those right now with the current global pandemic. You'll see the thunder, lightning, snow, rain, lightning bolt. That's how we are representing the current COVID-19 pandemic. Resilience and the dimensions of resilience that we will talk about today are represented by the umbrella. Just like an umbrella protects us from the rain, resilience protects us from, or rather helps us deal with life's disturbances and shocks in ways that are more beneficial and sustaining than if we did not have resilience at all. Realistically, just like we still might get a little wet in the rain if we had an umbrella, having resilience does not take all the stress or disturbance out of your life. But picture yourself in a downpour without an umbrella. And being in New York City, I have totally done that before. I have stood soaked, immobilized, and freezing without that umbrella. That's a life without resilience. In a life without resilience, we get immobilized by life's disturbances, they knock us down, and we stay down. You'll notice that the umbrella pole is represented, or rather, integrity is represented by the umbrella pole and our core values. We know that the bedrock of our leadership are our practices of our core values and the integrity that we have. It's a principle that we really hold dear in our programs at LeaderShape. And we know that it is no different in a practice of resilience. It's represented as this umbrella pole for two reasons. We know that our integrity will strengthen our resilience, but also when we live our core values with consistency in our leadership, we will need to call on our practices of resilience to weather difficult storms and challenging events. Lastly, at the bottom of the page, you'll notice that the ground is represented as our resilient communities. When we model a practice of resilience and infuse the dimensions of resilience into our communities, resilient communities develop and grow. On a global scale, resilient communities and communities that are able to anticipate risk, minimize a disaster's disruption to everyday life and local economies, and minimize loss or damage to life. That is extremely relevant right now. On an everyday organizational or institutional scale, a resilient community might be one that is able to recover quickly with minimal upset to daily functions, where team or community members work collaboratively to anticipate risk, limit impact, and bounce back rapidly through adaptability, evolution, and growth. I'm working with a lot of clients right now where I'm watching them shift their working practices, shift their ability to do output, and they are showing themselves to be resilient communities because they are able to adapt. When resilient leadership is practiced, the community can benefit from joyful attention, have a significantly clearer interpretation of what is happening, and be able to notice novelty in nature, or we have it represented there by landed attention. The ability to pay attention to the natural world and having more presence in general. So as exemplified in this model, there can be many components to becoming a resilient leader. And our work today will break down some of those components and offer practices in our everyday life. I love this image of this little one having us really hold an image of resilience connected to our model with that umbrella. Given the model from LeaderShape about the components of resilience, this quote from Jean Chatsey applies. Resilience isn't a single skill. It's a variety of skills and coping mechanisms. To bounce back from bumps in the road, as well as failures, you should focus on emphasizing the positive. There are skills that we as resilient leaders have to focus on and practice and have a deeper understanding of. Resilient leaders have to know where they are strong. This takes a lot of self-awareness. Resilient leaders know what takes them from pressure to stress and how to rebalance, and how to find a way through the uncertainty, change, and even crisis. Abby's going to tell us more about what we can turn our focus to focus on different components of resilience.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tanya. I really appreciate that. Through this work of resilience, we've identified these higher principles of resilience. There's 7 of them listed here, and they're components of resilience that we know that resilient leaders practice. They continue to demonstrate on a regular basis, and they call upon these principles when they're in times of stress and when they're in those moments of anticipating adversity. These principles are highlighted by Dr. Zood as practices to bring into our daily lives that build our resilience. And because there's 7 of them listed here, there's also 7 days in the week. And so there's one of them to practice for each day of the week, to turn your focus to for each day of the week. So just last week, starting a week ago Monday, Tanya and I posted short videos about each of these higher principles of resilience. And so if you look on our social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, or even within this app, basically you can't avoid it. We posted a 3 to 4 minute video on each of these higher principles to tell you more about what they are, how they support your resilience, and how to practice them. And so we hope those videos are helpful to you and how you strengthen your own resilience practice. We will later this week have all those videos strung together into one video that you could watch collectively, or perhaps share with someone that you know might be wanting to work more on these. And so I will ask you all, as you consider these 7 higher principles here, if you could respond in the chat feature here. There's a poll that we will pop up for you so that you can respond to this question. As you consider these 7 higher principles of resilience, which of these do you practice pretty easily? Okay, we're seeing those numbers come in there. It looks like, you know what I see? Forgiveness and acceptance are real hard, and I couldn't agree with you more. People are not choosing that as their top easy one. It looks like meaning and purpose is really easy for people. Compassion and gratitude are really high on that list. Me personally, I chose celebration as something that's really easy for me to practice. Friends, I have some cupcakes in my kitchen right now, just waiting for me to frost them, because I think it's fun to look for just the little things to celebrate, and to find something fun to celebrate. And for me today, that celebration is just being able to see the darn sunshine. And I'm really, really grateful for that today. All right. It looks like most people have had a chance to respond to that then. So I will now turn you to asking the second question about the higher principles, which is, which of them is a little bit harder for you to practice? As I see your responses come in here, I see forgiveness, I see acceptance, reflection, meditation, and prayer. These are hard ones to practice for sure. I hope as you're considering your responses there and you're thinking about what is difficult for you to practice, that you will turn to those videos that we have posted so that you can consider other ways that you can practice those higher principles. That I don't think any of them will get easy for you. That's why we call them a practice, right? Is so that you can spend more time thinking about, what does it look like in your life? How does it support your resilience? And then how can you practice it with a little activity that you can contribute to? And so with that, I will turn us back over to Tanya for a couple of slides.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. When I think about those higher principles that are easy and tough for me, gratitude is the one I selected as easy. I have, thankfully, thanks Oprah, developed a really great gratitude practice. And for me, celebration is a struggle sometimes. I forget to celebrate those things. And so it's nice to have this as part of my practice that I can return to regularly. As we move into this thought about and conversation about resilient leaders, we recognize that resilience can be a choice. And just a note for us, we clearly could do some more conversation, Abby, around the intersections of privilege and resilience, because I think that is really bringing, people are really trying to understand like how those things work together. And I noticed Arlette asked a question around privilege sometimes not allowing for resilience to build.
Right.
And again, I think that's a whole nother webinar for us to dive into, because it's a complex conversation that we can have around what is really going on, what might be really going on for people who have privileged identities, what they can do to build resilience, and what might be holding them back from that. So we saw your question, Arlette, and making a note about future topics. So resilience is a choice. And we have to choose to practice the skills, maybe the higher principle skills, maybe the conversations with our communities, which we'll talk about in a second. But we have to practice those skills before the moment of crisis so that we can choose resilience in the crisis. And so we're choosing each day before as we understand the depth of resilience, and we're choosing in the moment. Resilient leaders build resilient communities. And we really want to spend some time talking about, first, what resilient communities, how would you describe, or how would you define, or where have you seen resilient communities, so that we can then take a look at what are the people in those communities, what do the leaders in those communities do to foster that resilience? So we have another question, and we want you to, or a couple of questions, we want you to think about this and do some reflection for a few minutes. we want you to think about a resilient community that you either have been a part of, that you've seen, maybe throughout history. It could be within your own sphere of influence. It could be a group from campus or from your organization. And we want you to consider these things. What obstacles did they face to build their resilience? What impact did that have on the community and the crisis particularly? And what were the leaders doing during that moment? Because we want to understand, again, what the leaders are doing in those communities to foster that resilience. So go ahead and think for a moment and start to add your examples of resilient communities to the chat. Abby, can you think about any resilient communities that immediately come to mind for you?
I can. I thank you for asking that. I was thinking in the times that I have facilitated resilience, I'm always so blown away by the examples that people contribute to this question. And so I think that how people responded in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina is something that always stands out to me. I see Jennifer Perry, almost as I was saying it, I see Jennifer responded with almost the same, the restaurant owners. I think that's a wonderful example. I also had a student group one time as I was facilitating this. They offered up the Avengers as a community. And I had to ask them to offer a lot of spoiler alerts as they were sharing about that resilient community, because not all of this, my hand is raised, had seen the final episode at that point. And so we got to be careful in how we talk about those movies in particular. I think another resilient community, and maybe I'm being very future looking as I think about this, but I think college campuses will be really resilient communities as we turn to a post-pandemic world and what that will look like. Meg Andrews, I see your example here about the Boston community after that Boston Marathon bombing. What a wonderful example that when we saw something terrible and heartbreaking happen, the way that people responded to that is so amazing to see. The San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, I see your example there, Maria Elena.
Sarah, I appreciate your naming of dreamers. Very resilient group of people who are facing immigration challenges all the time. And we can think of so many communities by identity, particularly marginalized groups. Again, I see Sarah mentioning queer folks after the Pulse shooting.
Yeah.
And this I really do think that we have another topic to come around the intersections of social justice and resilience. There's something there because I think that there is a way to see resilience in communities that are marginalized and potentially learn from them. Yeah.
I agree. It's so inspiring to read these comments and how people are responding to these ideas. There's so many examples of resilient communities.
Yep. So I'm going to shift us a little bit and invite you to, you've already done the resilient community that you thought of. Let's think about what the leaders were doing. And so when you think about which community that you chose, give some examples of what you saw leaders doing during the moments of crisis. And we'll take some of those in the chat box and what I'll ask Abby, since we're paying attention to time, is that we keep moving and we start to notice how people have contributed to the chat while we go over some of the examples that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I'm starting to see some of those responses come in, Jennifer. I really like your point there that they kept doing what they knew would serve others in that community. And I think that's a great example. You're almost like an audience plant, Jennifer, I feel like, as we move into this next slide and thinking about they gathered information before making big decisions. Oh, I really like these comments that you all are coming up with about what resilient leaders were doing. Being vulnerable brought people together. Allie, that's a great one. Juan, I see your comment too about gathering information. I think that's really important. Oh, these are so great. Oh, this is really good. Sorry, my chin is on my desk a little bit as I'm reading how wonderful your responses are here. So as we're thinking then about looking at your examples about what resilient leaders can do, we want to share a few of our own suggestions about what resilient leaders look like to create resilient communities. Please know that many of these examples, they're relevant to the moment in this time of pandemic and the responses to it, but we feel like there's a timeliness to them and a timelessness to them as well. And we hope that you get a sense of that here as well as we look through these examples. So one thing that resilient leaders can do right now is continue to practice the skills that they know, because they know where their strengths lie. They are able to take care of themselves so that they can take care of others. And we can take an example here of what we're told to do in the safety demonstration before our planes take off, because we're all paying attention to the flight attendant in those moments, to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help someone else with theirs. And so that example reminds us to take care of ourselves so that we have the capacity to take care of others. Be mindful of what that looks like in taking care of yourself, and setting boundaries around yourself too, because sometimes I think you can often become the person that everyone comes to and looks to for assistance. But make sure that you're spending time to take care of yourself in that moment. We can also use our resources right where we are to meet the needs of those within our spheres of influence. And I really love this quote from Arthur Ashe here. I've turned to it oftentimes, where it seems like the things that you need to do are insurmountable. But if you start where you are and use what you have and do what you can acknowledge those resources that you have so that you can get work done and you can continue in that resilient space. And Arthur Ashe certainly knew a thing or two about being a resilient leader, as the first and only Black man to win a singles title at Wimbledon, at the US Open, and then at the Australian Open. He's also had contracted HIV/AIDS in the early 80s and went on to create a foundation to educate others and to fund research on the disease too. And so the ways in which he was providing for his community is really remarkable. The next example that we'll turn to for resilient leaders is to be calm and factual in role modeling what you want the community to do. And the community can respond in kind to that. If we can set politics and bipartisanship aside and just think about New York's Governor Cuomo and his model about what he's been doing and his impact on the state of New York that's getting hit so hard right now by COVID-19. He's bringing in experts to his daily press conferences, and he's relying on them to share facts that they are responsible for. He's not claiming to own all the information or to have all that information at his fingertips. He's allowing those other folks on his staff and within his community to take credit for that work that they're doing. And we know that Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky is doing something really similar as well to that, as he's addressing his constituents on a daily basis in this time of pandemic. He recently said, and let me start the way I start every time I talk to Kentuckians at every day at 5 o'clock. And that's saying that we will get through this and we will get through it together. And Tanya, if I remember right, he invites them all to say that along with him.
Yes.
Wonderful.
I love it.
I really like that example. And then Tanya's got a couple of examples to share with us as well about what resilient leaders are doing.
So we also know that resilient leaders, and a couple of people I think talked about this in their examples of like being very purposeful. Resilient leaders aren't busy doing new things. They are being purposeful and intentional in the work that they're deciding to do. They understand that their value. They understand their value in the community, but they connected to that. I think they understand the value of the community itself and the members of the community, and they don't need to overact or create busyness to prove their worth.
Right.
They're being thoughtful about their contributions, and the impact of those contributions on others. During the pandemic, they're not just going about hoarding toilet paper. They're awake during the moment when resilience is needed. They acknowledge that this time of shelter in place isn't an extended self-care retreat, but it's an opportunity to be present and aware and move with intention. They also listen to and understand what their community needs and are able to use their leadership to act from their values to provide what the community needs. Jose Andres and his World Central Kitchen are great examples of this. This Spanish chef and his not-for-profit act basically as first responders, and there have been lots of people who are doing this now during COVID, but this references particularly another time, but he has also continued it during this time, that they provide meals for communities that have been hard hit by natural disasters. And their mission is simple: a hot plate of food when it's needed most. And the last one that we want to share is really, it's a key one, but I think that we sometimes get it confused because I think we struggle as a society to really, as individuals in a society, to really hold boundaries. And so resilient leaders make themselves available to the community, but they do that with boundaries. And we want to draw on Brene Brown in a lecture that she's done called Rising Strong as a Spiritual Practice, but also in her book, Rising Strong. She talks about the importance of boundaries for wholehearted living. She literally says that the people who live most wholeheartedly are the folks who have boundaries. Boundaries are a function of self-love and self-respect. To practice resilient leadership, leaders have to know that thoughtful and purposeful boundaries are necessary in maintaining resilience. Connected to what Abby shared earlier, the old adage, and you're probably hearing New York City outside my window, the old adage, you can't pour from an empty cup, is at work here. If leaders give all of their energy away, they will actually be useful to no one. Abby's going to begin to wrap us up by taking another reflective moment and sharing some information in the chat.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tanya. I really appreciate that. And truly, any example that we can provide from Brene Brown, any opportunity to share her work, I think is a good opportunity. I would love it once again if you all could respond in the chat feature in response to this question here. So we've just provided some examples for you that we've thought through about what resilient leaders can be doing right now. And you've also shared examples about what you saw resilient leaders doing within those resilient communities that you had mentioned. And so what can resilience leaders do to build and sustain resilient communities? What are other things that you can think of that resilient leaders can do? Maria Elena, I like this point here too about what saying no graciously looks like. I think that's really important. You can't say yes to everything. Mutual respect, that's a really good one too.
I love, Chris, your resilient leaders are not only placing the oxygen mask on first, they're reading the safety cards, they're locating the exits, they're really paying attention. That's what I hear. And I love that.
That's really good. Being transparent, showing appreciation, that's a really good one, Sean. I really appreciate that too.
I think that we, on the boundaries piece, and I see the point about saying no and saying no graciously. I think, we could have a whole conversation about why we might struggle with boundaries. And I love that point about we actually probably are not living wholeheartedly without them. And so how do we help leaders understand that they are necessary in order to practice resilient leadership?
Yeah, I agree. Allie, I like point here too about using music with your team as a guided reflection. I think that's really wonderful. These are great.
So wonderful. So we're drawing near to the end of our time, and we just want to offer you a couple of questions to take with you. What does it look like for you to be a resilient leader during this time right now? And again, that might be on your campus, in your work group, on your team, in your organization, in your family, in your relationship with your children. But what does it look like for you to be a resilient leader during this time? Some of that will start to come up for you. And obviously you can take some of the examples and things that we've provided today, but also that you've provided in the chat. We also want to look at what gets in the way of us being resilient leaders, because those are the things that we want to try to move out of our way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then how do we communicate calm in our actions? One of the last things that we want to provide, and I'm going to invite Kristen to come back in, we have a handout that basically is our notes from this work, and gives some questions as well that will allow you to download and allow you to reflect some more on what we've talked about.
Yeah, exactly. And that handout will be available to you all in the recorded version of this webinar as well. And then we can, Kristen, if you can release that handout within the chat feature as well. I believe that's how that works, so that if you wanted to share this recording with someone else, and you can share that handout with them as well, so that since they didn't have the in-person chat feature, that they're able to respond to those questions as well. And then additionally, if you're perhaps someone who just wants more time with these chat questions, and you want to spend a little bit more time yourself just considering what those questions are, and maybe respond to them a little bit differently than you would quickly in the moment, then you're able to do that within the handout as well.
Well, this has
Perfect.
been fun, Abby.
Yeah, this is really cool.
It has. I'm back on. Can you all hear me okay?
We can hear you just great.
Wonderful. Well, I did make the handout available. It should be available to everyone. If you go to the handout section, you should be able to download the PDF. And just as Abby said, you can print it, you can share it, use it for your own resources. And if you have any issues doing that, let us know and we can make sure that we get you a copy of it.
Great.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you to Abby and Tanya for sharing this work with us and these thoughts on resilience. And I want to thank all of you as well for joining us today. We really hope that it's been a valuable use of your time as you think about tools that you can either sharpen or add to how you already practice resilience. If you'd like to know more about resilience, Abby mentioned the Higher Principles videos, and if you scroll back through the chat, I did put the links to those, but we'll also make them available again in the app when we get the longer collective video here released just later today. So you'll have that. And like I mentioned, we will also post this webinar if you want to watch it again, or if you want to share it with someone that you think would benefit from having this conversation, or that you would benefit from having this conversation with as well. Sometimes it is nice to be in this conversation with others together. And so we'll share that with you. Please do share that with others. And the one thing that I will ask of you all as you've listened and prepared is, we are honored to be able to be a part of this conversation with you all. And as a small not-for-profit, it really is our goal to be able to make this content available to more and more people. And so if you did enjoy this content and you feel so inclined that you'd like to donate a little bit of money back to offset the resources that went into developing the program, I have put a link to our donate page there. It is definitely not expected, but always appreciated if that is something that you can do to give back. And if you have other questions about resilience and the curriculum that we have available to provide for organizations and for communities. I will put an email address in the chat feature as well. You can just email lead@leadershape.org, and we will be able to talk to you more about how we might be able to help your community, your organization, your department in developing their resiliency as they move forward. So thank you again for your time today. We hope that the rest of your day, as you leave this webinar, you have moments where you can practice this resiliency and you feel stronger in yourself in the communities that you're a part of. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.